Okay, everyone. So I hope you're ready for the last track presented by Jan Ulferts about Kaiten Sushi at Chef at Goodgame Studios. Enjoy.
Hi. Good afternoon, actually. So, may I introduce me and the company? So, I'm Jan Ulferts. I'm working for a small company grown in the last 6 years to about 1,200 employees. As the name states, we actually in the gaming industry, and we currently have about 12 games in 26 languages, but all around the world almost. So this is actually how the infrastructure looks like. So we actually have 9 locations around the world. A rough mix of bare metal machines, VMs, cloud machines, mixed to nearly all of the world. It's all about 1,200 hosts actually, and well, as you may expect, we actually need some kind of automation in there. So in the past, before I started, we actually had CF Engine. Well, it basically did its job, but at a certain point, it may be hard to maintain, especially in our case and how we actually build it and how we actually wrote all the configuration stuff. So, for example, a partial file of the CF Engine distribution was about 5K of lines, which is, as you may expect, even with Git, hard to manage. So you may be able to use CF Engine and just split this stuff up, but actually, if you want also some of your devs getting into this stuff and taking care of it, you may think about reusage of code and, well, actually, devs are more familiar with code and not with configuration. And CF Engine is more or less configuration and not code. So this is basically our perspective on this. So we had the challenge to pick something else, and we actually challenged also CF Engine in a slightly different setup against, I guess it was Puppet and Chef actually. And we decided to go with Chef in this case, because this is the main features we actually like about Chef. So it's at first just Ruby code. It's just methods. You can actually do nearly everything you want with it. You can version it, and actually you can use constraints in your recipes. Well, if you have dependencies, and you actually can build artifacts about given versions with Bergshelf, actually. It's expandable by design. So this is something we actually missed in the CF Engine, is writing your own methods, writing your own code inside of the automation. So, for example, in this case, I'm not quite sure. Can you see it? I guess a bit. Okay, this is actually a piece of method which installs a MySQL service on a given port with a given version and so on. So actually, you're writing methods you can reuse again. So this is possible with nearly everything in Chef. So you can, for example, rewrite some of the Chef given methods like templates and reuse this for your own purpose, which is really quite useful if you have a big amount of code. Also, the testing part in Chef is quite handy. So let's pick the unit tests, which are really, really useful if you want to control the current code you're writing. So just imagine you have some logic in your configuration management, and you just want to prove if the logic just works after you applied your patch. So what this unit test just does is somewhere in the recipe it's just checking in which kind of environment the chef run is working, and in this case it's the production run, and it actually should then include a given recipe. So this is just proving the code flow. It doesn't tell you anything about the result in the end, but actually it's just testing the logic you wrote. The second part is the acceptance, which is the official naming of this, but we call it integration testing, where you just spawn a VM and apply all the cookbooks, and afterwards just check, okay, does the MySQL service really run? Is it enabled? Is it installed? And so on. You also can check for open ports or just run commands, whatever you want. But this basically checks if the code you wrote really gets you to the result you expect. So after we decided to go with Chef, we actually built a small Scrum team, and back then we had about 3 major technical departments. And if you start something new, it's really useful to just get everybody on the same page and maybe introduce them to being part of this. So this is, let's say, live DevOps. I don't know. Well, I doesn't like the naming of this. But anyways, we just we use this to get our devs into this new configuration management tool. And so we built a Scrum team of 6 engineers, 2 from every major department, every major technical department we had back then. And added to this team a Scrum Master and a product owner to just have a kind of managed flow in there. And this team got 4 major goals. Well, this is another topic, but actually it's quite important. Every goal was for about a month, and each had 4 sprints, so a sprint a week. And actually, we introduced in 4 months a whole complete new configuration management. What is also to note in there, nobody of this team was really deep into Ruby or Chef. So the other 2 departments beside the operations department were the server development team, which is basically Java, and the web development team, which is basically PHP. And we actually merged them together to this platform engineering team to just get the configuration management started and get everybody on this page. And actually, we hope to get more acceptance inside the teams of, just doing something new. But actually, after we finished this whole project, the whole structure changed. So the company changed and so on. But nevertheless, the team did a quite good job. And this is actually where this talk is about. Because the team was not about Chef itself. This may also be interesting for somebody who's not using Chef, because it's a kind of workflow we introduced and the kind of, let's say, standards we used and some tools I want to introduce, which are out of this team. So at first, I would like to show the structure we decided in the team to get the cookbook started and to have a point where you state, okay, this kind of cookbook is directing to this kind of server. And we actually started with something, I guess, also all the other configuration management tools are using. We call it a base cookbook. It's actually something you want to have on every server. So it should be really the same stuff on every server, maybe authorized keys or some packages you want to have on every server, or, I don't know, message of the day and maybe something more. it should be the same on every host. Well, this is actually a lie because, yeah, there is a given difference between VMs and hardware servers and so on. So this is also taken care of by the Space Cookbook. The second special cookbook we introduced was the Flavor Cookbook. The idea behind it was to have a kind of library of common tasks or common, let's say, roles. Roles is a kind of special word in the chef context. So, but it's really a kind of role. So, for example, in this case, we have a flavor for MySQL server, which actually is doing some sysctl configuration stuff, doing the servers, and doing some usual configuration for MySQL and so on. But you are be able to override this in the third special cookbook. It's the application cookbook. And do your own stuff in there. So it's just the usual stuff, and afterwards, if you want to, just override it. If you don't, you just get the usual Goodgame MySQL server. There's also something special. Well, it's not really good shown here, but anyways, there is a project name and a node type in it. And this is really something we actually liked about this whole structure because, as you see in the server name, we actually represent the node type and the project behind it. And this means you actually can identify a server or a node type or whatever the server does by its cookbook itself. So it's kind of, yeah, fixed rules we actually have. After we decided to have the structure, we gone forward for the workflow. So at first we just started writing cookbooks and just applying them to GitLab, and yes, some wrote tests, some not. Well, some wrote tests but didn't start them before they push, and some just applied against the chef server, and well, it just mixed up. So we actually decided to close the whole group in GitLab with the cookbooks, so nobody is able to push to these cookbooks except Jenkins. So we introduced a Git flow-based workflow, which is actually starting with creating a cookbook. Then, well, you fork it, you code your stuff, you write the tests, you test it maybe if you want to. If not, well, it actually doesn't matter. You write the docs, just doing familiar commits and getting it to a merge request. But this whole workflow is started by Jenkins again. So you can do it locally, but Jenkins will do it anyways. So if you, for example, write a test which fails and apply this to a merge request, Jenkins will catch up and just state, okay, well, this is broken, you're not allowed to apply it. So let's get into some details of this workflow. So the first one was creating a cookbook. So there are some implemented features in Chef to create a cookbook from a kind of template. But what we actually wanted was we wanted a repository where we can maintain this kind of template cookbook and have always the same procedure of building this cookbook. And the second cool stuff of this is because we closed the cookbook group in GitLab, so nobody is able to change anything except Jenkins. Only Jenkins can create these cookbook repositories in there. So it's doing some more stuff like you need to log in for Jenkins to just type the cookbook name. And in this case, it will replace the maintenance informations in the README and so on. So after you just created your cookbook, there is a GitHub flow-based workflow. which actually means we try to keep the master always stable. So the master is always the latest stable release of the cookbook. There are more releases, so actually we tag all our stable builds, but anyways, the master always is the latest stable build. So the code part is something which is actually, depending on everyone who wants to write code in maybe Vim or whatever editor, it actually doesn't matter. So it's cool to have some highlighting in there. It's maybe better, Atom, as the editor of my choice, has some more features like linters. So the food critic and Robocop linters are really crucial for us. Also some Git features and so on. But actually you don't need it, but it's really useful to have it. So at the code part, we introduced, as I just told, some cleaning up parts. So we just noticed that if we have 6 engineers from 3 different departments, with all of them at least have 6 or more different solutions for the same issue. And in this case, we came to the conclusion that actually something like Robocop to just check all the Ruby-related stuff. Like in this case, it just states, okay, do this in a single line, for example, or just stating, well, this code is not clean enough, you can do it really better. So these are some handy stuff to keep the code clean, because you otherwise will not get somebody new on it, because it's always different if you have this amount of cookbooks. It's really the same for the chef part of it. There is a project called Food Critic, which actually states something about the usual chef behavior stuff. I'm pretty sure there will be something for all the other languages, but well, for chef it's Food Critic, and it basically it did its job. So it's in this case stating that you not should use this kind of flow. Instead, you should use the guard rules to keep the template just run if something else happened. And there's also the unit testing I just mentioned about checking if the code really does what it does. So here is the whole part of this check if the production run really includes this kind of cookbook. For the integration tests, you actually have several of options to check them. We at first used server spec, which really did its job. It's based on the RSpec. It's based on RSpec, and it's nevertheless it's maintained till now, as far as I know. But Chef, as the company, just bought a new company, or a tiny company from Cologne, I guess. They wrote a special part of server spec. So they rewrote all the stuff and added some more features to it, like you can do some kind of weighted tests in there. So for example, you just check if there are some usual behaviors on the server, and then you can give weights to it and so on. So we decided later on to go with this way, and we currently just rewrite all the tests. But nevertheless, it's really nearly the same. What we also do in there is we apply these tests not on local VMs. We just use AWS Spot instances for this, because it's really cheap. It's most of the time fast, not every time. And for the CI, it's just really easy to use. So you just spin up a new VM, just apply the cookbooks, start a test, and afterwards the Jenkins just stating, okay, everything is working, and go to the next part. So because if you want all your teams and all the given departments to use all the stuff you write in this tiny team, you just need some documentation in there. And if you have infrastructure as code, well, why not use it to actually generate the documentation out of it? So there is a cool tool called Knife Cookbook Doc. It's generating documentation out of some comments around, for example, the attributes or something more, maybe LWRP or cookbook descriptions and so on. Jenkins is doing this. If the tests are finished, all of them, it's afterwards just generating a new README out of the current code. And the commit messages are also reused. So we just stated to all our devs, okay, use proper commit messages so we can generate a commit log out of it. So GitLab has a cool feature which is just detecting commit logs and readmes and so on, and just stating them in the menu bar. So you have for every version, so this is not readable because I don't want you to read this. But for every version, we just add the committer and his commit message to the commit log, and so we have a good overview of what happened in which version. And last but not least, the merge requests. So this is the part where the magic actually happens. So as in the time you just created the merge request on GitLab to this upstream cookbook, we're not allowed to push to. It's just triggering a Jenkins job. And a Jenkins job just goes the whole flow we had in here, goes through the whole flow, and at this point, it just accepts the merge request, but only if everything else just were okay. And this actually leads to the point where it just can't state anymore, well, it works on my machine, because you have a given workflow of getting all the stuff tested, have every time the same quality of code. You can't actually avoid it. So after the tests are finished, it's also pushed to the Chef server, and then you can use it. What is also quite crucial in there is after your merge request is accepted by Jenkins, you have a Berg file log, which is stating the whole versions of all the depending cookbooks in this given project, so you can apply them to your environment. If you don't want to rely on a Chef server, you actually can use Berg's vendor to generate an artifact, which is then be able to just push on any server you want. So each project is independent of others. So all of them are just maintaining their own dependent versions, which actually means that if you patch something somewhere, you actually don't get these messages like, oh, did you change something in there? My setup is broken. Or you're not being in a point that if you deploy a dependent cookbook, like for example, the base cookbook, you don't need to test any project by your own. Well, as far as they update their setup, they need to test their own stuff again. So also every environment actually has their own dependent cookbooks. So, and last but not least, we came to the conclusion that maintaining About 350 cookbooks, I guess, and their corresponding 3 Jenkins jobs is, let's say, quite hard. So we use a cool project called Jenkins Job Builder to just generate or automatically generate the jobs as long as you just apply them to GitLab. So it's working like we had in the first instance this create cookbook job, which is just triggering the Jenkins Job Builder, which then is crawling through the GitLab API and building all the new jobs and adding all the webhooks to these new repositories for all the cookbooks that are actually new. This actually also means that if the Jenkins job, or if the Jenkins dies, if the master is just gone away, you actually can generate a new one in, I guess, about 20 minutes. And actually, I'm a bit fast, I guess. So this is just the tools we actually use, and we actually like to show to you to maybe just try it out. It's not all about Chef. It's also most of them are also useful for other projects. So I'm finished. Any questions?
You didn't mention what type of Chef installation you have. It's a Chef server, standalone, community version, or?
Yeah, well, the question was, I guess the micro was not on. So the question was, what kind of Chef server do we use? So there are on-premise Chef servers, for example. There are the enterprise versions. We actually use the community one, and we're currently working on getting rid of it. So we currently working on this Berks vendor stuff, which is in there, to use another way of deploying the cookbooks to the servers. Because you just have 2 options. Buying the enterprise license or using the on-premise stuff. Because if you just have a single Chef server and, well, it's not capable of doing replication and not being HA, well, it's a bit hard of maintaining a worldwide distributed system. It actually works, and it especially works because we are not using stuff like node search, which is heavily relying on the Chef server, as well as we are not using Chef server dependent features. So we also not use the Vault stuff and the I forgot about the name. Nevertheless, so we are not using the Chef server features, so we are able to avoid it, actually.
Which version of Chef do you use?
Currently 12 mostly 12.6, I guess. But we actually try to stay on the newest version. So I guess currently it's 12.9. Or did you ask for the Chef server? So the Chef server is 12.
Any more questions?
Can you talk about the integration tests running on AWS instances? Is that a function of a test kitchen or something, or did you write this integration yourself?
Yeah, we are using the, we are using Kitchen at first, yes. And we are also using the Kitchen AWS plugin. But we also wrote some scripts around it. So actually, if you have your Kitchen YAML, to being more in the Chef and Kitchen detail, it's not always the same options in the local environment. So locally, the engineers are using for example, Vagrant and VirtualBox, for example, for just spinning up their test machines. And there are given special, well, you actually need some special attributes for the AWS stuff. And what we are doing is we let Jenkins apply this stuff to the test. But we are also working on, well, we are playing around with doing this inside of Docker. And we have some ideas of trying this in a combination of Mesos and QAMO, so KVM instances. But this is actually not working currently.
Anyone else? All right, then. Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.